Hey, everybody. It is Wednesday, October 9th. You're listening to the Mo News Podcast. I'm Osh Winunu.
And I'm Jill Wagner. This is the place where we bring you just the facts.
And we read all the news and read between the lines. Today, Jill, is International Beer and Pizza Day. I want the people to know.
The second part of that is very fitting because it's also my daughter's birthday. And
Happy
she is
birthday,
a huge
Alex.
pizza lover, specifically Sicilian pizza with Parmesan cheese.
Well, you'd be in trouble if she was a huge beer lover. How old is she turning? 5, 6?
Yes, at 6 years old. She has not had beer yet.
We should note, by the way, I was looking into the history of beer because what else do I do here at Mo News? It goes back to like 5,000 BC, Persia, the Egyptians. Like, we've been making beer for many millennia. So it goes way back. And I bet you back then when they were serving everyone wine and beer, I bet they were letting the kids have it. It's cleaner than water for like the first couple millennia of human existence. But now you should not be serving your kids beer. That is your public service announcement from here at Mo News.
Everyone's so touchy these days. All right. Lots of news to get to. Let's get to the headlines. Hurricane Milton headed for Tampa Bay, Florida. Why officials are not mincing words, saying that for some residents, if they don't evacuate, they will die.
Yes, stark words from the mayor of Tampa.
Now to tech news. Attorneys general from across the country are suing TikTok, saying it is designed to addict kids and that it causes them harm. And Moshe comes as more Americans say they are getting their news from TikTok, but not necessarily from the sources you'd expect.
Or based on all the conspiracy theories I'm getting lately, Jill, it's very obvious who they're getting their news from on TikTok these days.
The Supreme Court started a new session this week, and a majority of the justices, including the conservative justices, seem receptive to the Biden administration's limits on ghost guns. We'll tell you what happened in court. In a landmark move, the EPA is requiring the removal of all U.S. lead pipes in a decade.
Yeah, we'll tell you about that fight and the fact that 9 million American homes still get their water via lead pipes.
To real estate news, a sign of the times. Zillow, not just listing the price of a home and whether it has a pool, you can now see the climate risk data when shopping for a new house. And you know those spirit Halloween shops that have been popping up recently?
Well, yeah, tis the time of year.
We'll expect them to stick around a lot longer. How they are getting a holiday rebrand. Plus, Moshe is on this day in history.
Jill will tell you about the founding of one of our favorite states here on the Mo News Podcast, Rhode Island, which is neither a road nor an island. Jill, one of my favorite quotes from Linda Richmond, the character Mike Myers used to play on SNL back in the 90s. Discuss. Rhode Island, neither a road nor an island. Discuss.
I was wondering where you got that.
There's some like 90s quotes from like repeated Blockbuster rentals still stuck in my memory after all these decades.
Okay, let's start with what we know at this point about Hurricane Milton. Forecasters say that Milton has the potential to become one of the most destructive hurricanes on record for West Central Florida. It continued to shift between Category 4 and Category 5 throughout the day yesterday. And it is breaking records as one of the most powerful storms that we have seen in years. Yesterday was the final day for millions of residents to prepare for life-threatening impacts and evacuate the coast ahead of the monster storm's arrival. So as these storms, rain, and winds start to be felt today, landfall for the eye of the storm now is looking to be early Thursday morning between 2 a.m. and 6 a.m. At this point, the storm seems to be headed directly for Tampa Bay, where it could likely hit as a Category 3 or a Category 4 storm. The National Weather Service in Tampa Bay describes Milton as, quote, a historic storm for the west coast of Florida that could prove to be the worst storm to impact Tampa Bay in more than 100 years. So again, the storm was a Category 5 at its peak on Monday. and then it slowed down a bit to a 4. Then it strengthened again to a 5. And while the winds are now down slightly and it may end up making landfall as a 3, the storm surge and width of the storm is still huge, and its impact will still be nothing like the west coast of Florida has seen in decades. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis telling residents yesterday that the time was running out before landfall. He is urging residents to leave. More than 1 million people were under evacuation orders in at least 16 counties.
Yeah, unfortunately, if we're looking for good news, the dropping of Category 3, some people are looking at like, oh, it's dropping to Category 3. Keep in mind, Katrina is a storm that was once a Category 5 and made landfall as a Category 3, but still had 30-foot storm surge. Still, as the hurricane develops and becomes wider here, it carries with it that surge, wind, a width of the storm here. And so don't look at that number and say, well, at least it's not a Category 5, because the impact it'll have related to some of the other items the storm brings with it still will be record-breaking here. You're talking about the evacuations, Jill. The Tampa mayor struck a lot of folks. It certainly got several 100,000 views on her Instagram account yesterday when she was very blunt. Jane Castor was on CNN saying, if you stay in any area with mandatory evacuation, literally you will die. Take a listen to this clip from her on CNN.
I've never said that. And 10 to 12 foot surge. I mean, if this takes a jog to the south, that's going to save us from the storm surge. But it stays on the track that it's projected to be on right now. Or if it goes a bit north, would be even worse. Some of the predictions are saying that Pinellas County, to the south of us, the entire county is going to be underwater. So this is something that I have never seen in my life. And I can tell you that anyone who was born and raised in the Tampa Bay area has never seen anything like this before. People need to get out.
And your message is just, this isn't survivable.
If we have that predicted storm surge, it is not survivable.
You don't often hear that, Jill, from elected officials, just straight up saying that. But there is major concern. We're talking about 10 to 15-foot storm surge, unsurvivable storm surge in Tampa. And depending on when you're listening to this, it might be too late for you to already leave, especially if you live on the barrier islands, where they started to shut those down last night. And gas stations are empty for miles. The big concern with this storm is just the topography of the west coast of Florida. It's sea level, basically. It's low-lying, swampy terrain that is little resistance to the hurricane. The hurricane literally will push water up onto shore. And while a 5 to 10 foot storm surge on many parts of the east coast of Florida is survivable, here on the west coast of Florida, because of the way that Florida is sloped, basically all the water from Hillsborough Bay in Tampa could be pushed to shore, along with the freshwater flooding and everything it's going to be pushing in from the Gulf of Mexico. So, we're talking about multiple stories here when we talk about 15-foot storm surge. And this is something we saw with Hurricane Ian a couple of years ago. People tried to survive it. And even on the second floor, even on rooftops, were underwater there. So a major concern here. This is the worst case scenario. Now the storm continues to move up, move down, move up, move down. And even a 10-mile difference will make a huge difference when it comes to storm surge here. The hope for people, Tampa and north, is that it keeps moving south. The storm surge will be worse south of the storm. North of the storm, you'll still see winds and rain and some surge, but nothing like, you'll see at least south of the storm. But it continues to waver here, Jill. And given how close it is to Tampa Bay, there is just so much concern about what this storm could do. Rainfall, you could see 1.5 feet, and that's on top of a Florida that's already soaked right now. So it was not going to be able to absorb any more rain, especially another 1.5 feet of rain, along with the salt water coming ashore here. The National Weather Service has been very stark in its warnings, saying that the city of Tampa and the areas around it could see catastrophic damage, could be uninhabitable for weeks or for months here. Structural damage to even sturdy buildings could happen. And then there's all the projectiles we've been talking about, just all the damage of the flooding they saw from Hurricane Helene, which was 100 miles north of them, but they saw storm surge, they saw flooding. People have been cleaning out from that, leaving all their garbage on the road there to be picked up. And so they've been urgently trying to pick everything up, but unfortunately they have not gotten to everything. Those, of course, could be turned into projectiles here. You've already seen a bunch of linemen, National Guards folks from other states lined up, deployed to assist here. This ain't Florida's first rodeo. But again, even by Florida standards, this is an especially concerning hurricane. Jill, then there are the costs, already some projections here. A reminder, 2 years ago, Ian down in Southwest Florida saw $60 billion in insured losses. Milton may result in more than that, especially if it hits Tampa here. They're talking about as much as $150 billion in insured losses. There's insurance, and then there's reinsurance. That's the insurance that the insurance market gets. And there's major concerns there in the reinsurance market. More and more with climate change, with just Florida getting hit by storm after storm after storm, there are major questions about whether parts of Florida will ever be insurable again, given the risks associated and the increasing number of storms we're seeing headed towards that state.
All right, so everybody, if you're in that area, please heed the warnings and stay safe. Moshe, now to a story that we have covered quite a bit on the podcast, social media and teen health. And on Tuesday, more than a dozen states and the District of Columbia filed lawsuits against TikTok. The state's attorneys general, a combination of Democrats and Republicans, say that the app is designed to be addictive to kids and that it harms their mental health. It follows a national investigation into the company. It was launched over 2.5 years ago by these attorneys general for many states, including New York, California, Kentucky, and New Jersey. All of the lawsuits on Tuesday were filed in state courts. California's attorney general says, quote, they have chosen profit over the health and safety, well-being, and future of our children, and that is not something we can accept. So we've sued. Here is the Illinois attorney general talking about the lawsuit.
The action I am taking today is part of a broader collaboration with a bipartisan coalition of states seeking to hold social media platforms accountable for their role in addicting our youth to social media.
So in their lawsuits, the attorneys general are taking aim specifically at TikTok's algorithm. They say that the app is literally designed to addict children to the platform. In its filings Tuesday, the District of Columbia called the algorithm, quote, dopamine inducing. They say it was created, again, to be this intentionally addictive so that the company could trap many young users into excessive use and then keep them on the app for hours on end.
Yeah, they're talking about the endless scroll here, the For You feed, and then face filters, which create unattainable appearances for users, and just the psychological effect and mental health effect this has had on kids.
Moshe, the New York Times reporting on this, including from tech reporter Sapna Maheshwari. She's the one who wrote that story about Mo News a few months ago. And she says this is a really big deal because it's based on internal documents from TikTok itself that show how the company thinks about teens and preteens. So, for example, in Nebraska's filing, they said that documents showed that TikTok internally referred to American teens as a golden audience, noting that the younger the user, the better the performance, referring to their engagement with the app, more engagement, more ad sales. New York's lawsuit cited a study that said 50% of girls believe that they don't look good without editing. And so they say TikTok is well aware that their beauty filter leads to unhealthy, negative mental and physical disorders, but they choose to keep them on the platform anyway. And most certainly, TikTok isn't the only social media platform that lawmakers are targeting. About a year ago, dozens of states sued Meta, the parent company of Instagram, for knowingly and deliberately designing addictive features that also keep kids hooked on their platforms. But for TikTok, this also comes as its very existence in the United States is under question.
Yeah, they're all facing pressure, TikTok especially. Remember, TikTok is owned by the Chinese company ByteDance and faces a potential ban here in the U.S. in January if ByteDance, the legislation goes that if ByteDance doesn't sell TikTok to a non-Chinese owner, then TikTok will be banned here. Of course, TikTok is fighting that in court right now here in the U.S. Arguments took place before a judge last month. Any decision there, we've explained to you, is likely headed to the Supreme Court. And so likely we won't see a ban in January, but it remains to be seen here. And then, of course, if Donald Trump wins, it's a moot point because he is now, after wanting to ban TikTok while he was president the first time, now he says it should not be banned. He is much more anti-Meta now than TikTok. And so we'll see what happens here for TikTok. Multiple issues, multiple legal issues. They clearly have to hire a lot of attorneys here to deal with all these various suits. And this comes as a larger movement going on, a reckoning when it comes to the impact of social media on kids. Jill, it was the subject of a conversation we had recently with Naomi Gleit, the head of product at Meta, that's over on the Mo News Interview podcast. Had the chance to speak with her recently about the new parental protections over in Meta, and had a chance to ask her, like, why has it taken so long, and why are you guys doing this now, given, of course, everything that's taking place now in terms of pushback from parents, from the federal government, etc. TikTok, for its part, when it comes to these various lawsuits, says they've been working with the states here for several years. They disagree with the claims, many of which they believe to be inaccurate and misleading. They're proud, they say, and they remain deeply committed to the work they've done to protect teens and will continue to update and improve our product. The social media company does not allow kids under 13 to sign up for its main service and has some restrictions under 18 here, but clearly what they're doing is not working. According to, again, Democrats and Republicans. They agree on very few things these days, Jill, but one thing they do agree on, it appears, when it comes to big tech, is the potential negative influence of social media on kids under 18.
And Moshe, comes as a growing number of Americans are getting their news from TikTok. According to some new research from the Pew Research Center, 52% of TikTok users say that they regularly get news from the app. That's up from 22% in 2020. But interestingly, less than 1% of people that Pew surveyed said that they follow journalists or media entities on the platform, which means they are getting their news from content creators.
Content creators with no news or journalistic experience or background, Jill.
What could possibly go wrong?
What could possibly go wrong? That's why we're trying our best to fight the good fight out there. Listen, are there regular folks out there with good intentions trying to get information out? Absolutely. Is there a added benefit of getting your news from journalists and people with experience reporting things, sussing out what's true, what's not true? Certainly. And so this is one reason I think we see some of the questions that we do see from well-meaning people who are like, wait, tell me about how the government controls hurricanes and rams them into the shore. Like, where are you learning this stuff? I saw a TikTok. Which TikToker? Like, well, does it occur to you that the TikToker has no experience in meteorology, climate, the news, or anything about all the above, or none of the above? We're trying to have an honest conversation here. It does reinforce the fact that for many people, they've lost trust in the mainstream media and journalists, so they're turning to alternative sources. And sometimes alternative sources turn out to be right about certain things, because even a broken clock, Jill, is right twice a day, right? Isn't that how the old expression goes? And I think that, again, there's a wide pendulum of folks out there, some well-meaning, some literally on the payroll of the Russian government, as we found out from some recent revelations and cases filed by the FBI. So be careful, folks. And the Mo News audience, people listening to this podcast, Jill, they know better. That's why they listen to us over here. But at the same time, as we continue to see increasing distrust in journalism and in news sources, we're going to see this continued push to get your news from alternate sources. I put in air quotes. And so that's concerning here. It's something that I'm talking to organizations about, getting an education to content creators to help them suss things out. Because if you're a content creator for lifestyle or any other topic, food, and you're now being asked about the news and major issues going on, the least we can do is provide you with some resources. And there's some, again, saying, please help me, because my audience of several million people want to know what I think or want to know what to think about what's happening with the hurricane, or what's happening abroad in the war in Gaza or Ukraine, etc. So, I think that we just have to recalibrate as an industry. We have to get to the bottom of the distrust here and pivot accordingly and bring training to people, but with AI, with sort of nefarious disinformation sources coming from abroad. It's genuinely concerning. Jill, fun anecdote, in the last 24 hours, for those of you who follow me on Instagram, someone was trying to argue with me that the government can create hurricanes and crash them into Florida. And I'm like, logic and science say otherwise. And then they sent me a clip from a CBS morning show segment. They're like, watch this clip. Let me know what you think now. And my response was, I actually produced that segment back in 2013. You should watch the whole segment. And I know the person, and that's not actually what they're saying. And so, I think increasingly people are, again, because of an abject lack of trust, they're starting to believe some extreme, unfortunate things. And it is eroding the ability of first responders to do what they need to do. It's hurting people's ability to get the help that they need, and it's legitimately concerning. Jill.
All right, time for the speed read. The Supreme Court just started its new session this week after its summer break. So this from the New York Times. In one of the first cases that they're hearing this year, a majority of the Supreme Court appeared sympathetic to the Biden administration's restrictions on kits that allow people to make untraceable homemade guns, otherwise known as ghost guns. This case centers on whether the federal agency responsible for regulating firearms had acted lawfully when it enacted a rule to address a surge in ghost guns, again, weapons made from kits that you could purchase online. They're described as easy enough to assemble in less than an hour. The Solicitor General telling the justices that the agency, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, had responded to, quote, an explosion in crimes connected to ghost guns. She said the reason you want a ghost gun is specifically because it is unserialized and cannot be traced. Among the limits the agency imposed on the kits, requiring gun makers and sellers to be licensed to sell them, ensuring that the products are marked with serial numbers so that they can be traced, and having would-be buyers pass a background check. In recent years, though, the conservative wing of the court has been ruling against new gun laws. Last term, it overturned a Trump-era ban on bump stocks. Those are the firearm attachments that allow semi-automatic weapons to fire at nearly the rate of a machine gun. But this time around, at least 5 of the justices on Tuesday seemed to favor the limits imposed by the Biden administration. At least 2 of the conservatives, Chief Justice John Roberts and Justice Amy Coney Barrett, showed skepticism towards the gun manufacturers and the owners who are arguing that they should be able to purchase ghost gun kits.
Yeah, Roberts and Barrett, on some cases, have been sort of in the middle there, because you got the 3 liberals and then you got the 4 conservatives that are much more on the right there, Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, Alito, and Thomas. And so Roberts and Barrett sometimes are these swing votes on some of the cases. The lawyer for the gun groups argued that gun enthusiasts might enjoy building firearms from these kits. And so then Roberts and Barrett here try to get at the whole idea of, is this really for hobbyists? Are these gun kits for hobbyists? Or are they easy enough here for anyone looking to build a gun and get around gun laws? He drew an analogy, Roberts did, to people who love tinkering with cars. He said drilling a hole or two in a gun doesn't really give you the same reward as working on your car on the weekends. So how can you really call this for hobbyists? And so there again, a bit of skepticism that tinkering with guns is the same as other hobbies. It got into a whole discussion. Jill, they go down these rabbit holes on the court. Then some of the conservatives got in and talked about various hobbies, and then talked about getting various food kits, right, where you get a bunch of ingredients and put it together, and comparing that to a gun kit. Again, conceptually here, they're trying to just figure out where the limits should be on the law, and so they think about many different scenarios and what would be impacted here. At issue is really whether the ATF, the agency in the federal government, was allowed to issue, whether it acted outside the bounds in issuing a regulation back in 2022 to expand the definition of firearm under the Gun Control Act of 1968. We have talked to you about the cases. The Supreme Court has basically been saying, this Supreme Court, the conservative majority Supreme Court, saying this belongs with Congress. We don't believe that the federal government, that the executive part of the federal government, should have this much power to just change rules on its own. You got to head to Congress for this. You got to head to Congress for that. And so they have really been trying to take down what they call the regulatory state here. When it comes to various rules the EPA has, the ATF has. And so they're ruling here, could the ATF do this independently? Because remember, Congress, it's very hard to get things through there. And Republicans are not into this sort of thing. So we're going to see here when this ruling comes down. Typically, they come down in May and June. So we'll have to wait until then for the ruling. The case is called Garland versus Vanderstock. It was actually brought by gun owners and gun rights groups who argue that this rule put out by the ATF under the Biden administration exceeds the bounds of the agency's power under the law. They don't want to be swept up. They don't want hobbyists, gun hobbyists, to be swept up with criminals And that will be the core issue here. The court will end up ruling on.
From Reuters, the Biden administration finalized a landmark rule on Tuesday that would require water utilities to replace virtually every lead pipe in the country within 10 years, tackling a major threat that is particularly dangerous to infants and children. The White House has made removing every lead pipe within 10 years in the U.S. a centerpiece of its plan to address racial disparities and environmental issues in the wake of water contamination crises in recent years from Newark, New Jersey to Flint, Michigan. President Biden said public officials have long understood the dangers that lead pipes pose to the public, but it had never been given the national priority that it deserves. And he says that he is insisting it get done. The rule is widely seen as popular in industrial Midwestern states that are expected to play a major role in deciding the presidential election next month.
Yeah, the argument from the White House, this is good politics, but this is good health. More than 9 million homes across the country still supplied by lead pipes. They're the leading source of lead contamination in our drinking water. The projection from the EPA is that this whole project to replace all the lead pipes will cost $45 billion. The industry says actually multiply that by 3. Let's talk about 150 to 200 billion here. Republicans argue against this, saying this will cost taxpayers money. Democrats argue this is good health and good policy here. We've been hearing about this rule for a while. The EPA first proposed it back in 2023, says we got to replace all of them mandatory. Trump had actually passed a rule that had a looser standard. It did not set a universal requirement to replace all lead pipes. Biden ratcheted it up. This has been a big thing for the Biden administration. Again, there's a legal fight here with Republican officials, again, concerned that taxpayers will have to front the costs here. But serious health issues here. Lead poisoning, we know, can cause irreversible damage to the nervous system, the brain. It poses a specific risk to infants and children. Impoverished Americans, Jill, in particular, are vulnerable to the lead pipes. When we talk about the 9 million homes, most of them, when it comes to income level, fall close there to the poverty line. The EPA estimates that if this can get done, it'll prevent 900,000 infants from having low birth weight and avoid up to 1,500 premature deaths a year from heart disease if they can get this all done. So huge impact here on the next generation. We'll see how quickly, if at all, it can happen.
From CNN, a sign of the times when it comes to real estate. As intensifying natural disasters threaten growing swaths of the country, assessing an area's climate risk has become an essential part of shopping for a new home for many Americans. According to a recent Zillow survey, more than 4 out of 5 prospective homebuyers consider climate risks when they shop. And now in a new feature, Zillow will show how vulnerable properties for sale might be to extreme climate events.
Yeah, so Zillow has projections here. They divide into categories. They got flood, wildfire, wind, heat, air quality. They look 15 to 30 years in the future because, of course, when you take out a mortgage, you're talking about a 15-year mortgage or 30-year mortgage. And so ultimately here, they are seeing a growing number of home listings that are coming with major climate risk compared to homes listed even 5 years ago. According to all new listings on the website in August, 55% of homes carry a risk of extreme heat. 1/3 are at risk for wind exposure. About 17% of homes, about 1 in 5 homes, Jill, are at risk for a major wildfire, air quality. 1 out of 6 homes, flooding. 1 out of 6 homes. So, obviously we talked about it at the top with Milton. We've talked about it recently with Helene. We've talked about the wildfire issues, but increasing an issue here and something that the folks at Zillow are finding relevant to let you know before you make that big purchase.
And finally, from CNBC, some Spirit Halloween locations will be busy for longer than usual this year. Spirit Halloween will operate 10 stores through the entire holiday season as, quote, Spirit Christmas. So instead of the company's usual strategy of renting abandoned storefronts only long enough to host the Halloween-specific retailer, 10 stores around the Northeast will open through the end of the year. A spokesperson telling CNBC that Spirit Christmas is a new concept for us, and we are hopeful that it will resonate with our customers. They say the goal is to create a festive retail experience that captures the spirit of the season, much like they do for Halloween.
So yeah, we're talking to all of you in New Jersey, Connecticut, New York, Massachusetts, Pennsylvania. Some of you already have your Spirit Halloween locations. Now you'll have Spirit Christmas. Jill, stocking stuffers, holiday apparel, fun gifts, they say, unique decor, and all the special trimmings to create an unforgettable Christmas. And so increasingly, Jill, I see 24/7, 365 Christmas and Halloween coming to you soon. Notably, it's owned by Spencer Gifts. Remember Spencer Gifts at your local shopping mall? So, they're going to be sticking around. There's a lot of retail space available. So I see this going 365. What about you?
That's right. Why stop at Christmas? Go to New Year's, then it's Valentine's Day, Easter, spring.
There you go.
Summer.
People,
of course.
they love the decor. And so those of you in the Northeast get to check this out. Let your friends across the country know how it is. All right. Speaking of the Northeast, on this day in history, we begin in 1635. Roger Williams is banished from the Massachusetts Bay Colony. Roger Williams was a religious dissident. He did not like how they were confiscating Native American land. This is back in 1635. He was advocating for the separation of church and state. So Massachusetts said, get out. He's like, okay. So he goes south, hangs out with the Narragansett tribe, and they establish a settlement located in present-day Rhode Island. The goal there was that this was open. Rhode Island was open to everyone seeking freedom of conscience, the removal of church from civil matters. And so Puritans who were dissatisfied came with him from Massachusetts, taking the success of the venture as a sign of God. Roger Williams was like, all these people are coming. It might be a sign of providence. Hence, Jill, the capital of Rhode Island. All right, we fast forward now to the 19th century. We head to Washington, D.C. on this day in history. The Washington Monument opens to the public on this day in 1888. It is, of course, the marble-faced granite obelisk that honors our first president, George Washington. In the elevator, it took about 10 to 12 minutes to ascend the monument. Of course, it had some issues a couple years ago with that earthquake about a decade ago in D.C. It took some time to reinforce it and is open again to the public. Jill, part of our fascination back then with ancient Egypt. All right, we fast forward here more than a century to the late 20th century. 1999 is the year Coachella, the inaugural Coachella, is held out there in California. Among the headliners, Rage Against the Machine, Tool, and Beck. Remember Beck? I'm a loser, baby. So why don't you kill me?
I do. I remember.
Fast forward to 2009, Jill. Some people remember this. Even Obama thought this was a little ridiculous. He won the Nobel Peace Prize 9 months into his presidency for what the Norwegian Nobel Committee called his extraordinary efforts to strengthen international diplomacy and cooperation between peoples. Everyone can be nominated, even by people you don't know. I can nominate you for a Nobel Peace Prize, Jill. So always be skeptical. They're like, this person was nominated for a Nobel. Everyone, you can nominate yourself for a Nobel. Maybe you can't, but
let's do it.
Let's
test the theory.
Yeah, and then we could say, like, Jill and Moshe have both been nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize.
Nobel nominated.
Nobel Peace nominated, Moshe and Jill of the Mo News podcast. So everyone could be nominated, but they actually gave him the award. Some people were like, I can't believe he actually won it. He even said that. Anyway, he didn't even attend the ceremony.
I didn't know that Obama thought it was ridiculous that he won that before becoming president.
It was embarrassing. It was embarrassing. He was like 9 months into his presidency and he won the Nobel Peace Prize. Anyway, everyone was sort of fascinated with him at that point. Jill, we end here with pop culture. On this day in 1986, Joan Rivers becomes the first female late-night TV talk show host. She would be fired 6 months later. But still a big deal. She premiered on Fox at that point. And Jill, still late night TV, still almost entirely male dominated.
Right. They'll get a woman host when nobody is watching late night anymore.
Which is we're heading that
basically where we are.
All right. It's your turn.
One of the quotes I love from Joan Rivers, she was talking about just her success. And she said, I succeeded by saying what everyone else is thinking.
And finally, it's a beautiful day. 24 years ago, U2 releases that song among their many, many hits from the decades.
All right. We hope everybody has a beautiful day today. Thank you for listening to the Mo News podcast. If you like what you hear, please share this with your friends. It will help us grow. Follow us and subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and review us in the App Store.
And cue the birthday girl.
Happy birthday, Alex.